Much like the video game industry is suffering a little bit of what could be constituted as a crash, could the toy industry be facing similar thing with overpriced exclusives such as this? Continuing an ongoing trend for the early part of 2024, it looks like McFarlane is going back to an awful lot of desired or somewhat wished upon releases for certain characters, vehicles even, as you can see before you, that we've never really gotten a good whack at as far as the DC Multiverse line, as far as the 7-inch scale line, and to see exactly what they can come up with. And amongst them has to be Catwoman and the Batpod from the Dark Knight trilogy. However, what a lot of people did not account for, and I can argue are somewhat justified in being a little perturbed, to put it mildly, is making this entire set a bit of a exclusive to McFarlane Toy Store under the Gold Label. Furthermore, you have two variants out there for Catwoman, one labeled as a Platinum and then the other as a Gold Label exclusive to the McFarlane Toy Store. So an awful lot of the distribution happening with this specific release has been kind of muddled. So it looks like it's falling upon the very hardcore collectors that go on these routine toy hunts to really nail down exactly how badly they want this figure or this set. Should they be going for the Batpod and completing the whole vehicle ensemble to really, put it up on the shelf and adorn it for either their Catwoman or the Batman? And that's actually where I approached this set when I first pre-ordered it. But looking back at that price point, that very hefty price point of $70, that really doesn't sum up to what is usually included in a set like this, because you often have to consider that these figures go for about $20, vehicles are often about $30, so you would expect this thing to be about $50. Does $70 really warrant a Gold Label exclusive to the MTS nowadays? Let's take a look at Catwoman first here, because initially I thought that she was going to be a brand new figure, since this is our first official take by McFarlane towards Anne Hathaway's portrayal of the character in Dark Knight Rises, which I personally believe she was actually well casted, and I just feel like she just didn't get enough material, but there was definitely something on the surface that I really did like. And in my opinion, as far as the Nolanverse, as some people have dubbed it, her actual design, specifically with the goggles kind of forming the cat ears, I always thought that those were very novel ways to portray the Catwoman look without ever actually calling her Catwoman. There were like newspaper clippings and things like that calling her like a cat burglar or something like that, but it was often referred to as Selina Kyle. I think she's even referred to as Selina in the credits. So in my opinion, this was always the intended look for Catwoman when it was announced that she was going to be in the Nolanverse for The Dark Knight Rises. But I didn't expect that this was just going to give an excuse to McFarlane to now very heavily, much more than I ever have seen before, retool and reutilize a prior Catwoman figure. Yes, this is the first time that pulling it right out of the box, which is a very well compact box, but sadly when I saw how tiny the box was, I knew that she was just going to be sandwiched in there, and sure enough she was. But finally feeling her in hand, I was like, yeah, this is the first time I definitely see the light, as many of you have seen with some prior McFarlanes before, because I know that a lot of you were leaving very colorful comments in my video towards that Gold Label 3-pack that included the repainted DC Rebirth Batman, the Kate Kane Batwoman, which I formally apologize to getting wrong. I know it's not Cassandra. I acknowledge that. I understand you guys were right. However, I still stand that I really didn't see the retooling of the Nightfall Catwoman when I was pulling her out. I still stand by my theory that they had something to do with Mattel. Maybe some exchanged emails, maybe not the full blueprint, but something was definitely planted in there. It just looks too similar to me. This, however, is way too egregious to the point where I'm like, yeah, this is Nightfall Catwoman, through and through. You see the boots very risen upright. In fact, I don't think I even remember her having boots this high in the movie. I'm going to have to go back and rewatch it, but the boots, the sculpting, the proportions, the arms, holding it in hand, and just taking a very good look at the overall costume design and the figure here in hand, I was like, yeah, I felt this before. Phrasing there, but I really did feel this figure in hand before, specifically character-wise, since she is a Catwoman, and the first image that popped into my head was that Nightfall purple Catwoman that I covered in a short some time ago. That was a really good figure, but still, just taking that physique, taking that bulk, and then just kind of giving it that Kevlar look texture to the middle part of the torso, the high top part of the legs right here, and the shoulders, and then going back to that glossy nature of, like I said, the gloves and the gloves and the boots, the knee-high boots that just kind of give away the illusion that, yeah, they simply just took that existing figure, repainted it black, covered up a little bit of the textures, maybe gave her an extra few little bits here and there to cover it up and make it look a little closer, resemble a little closer to that Nolan take, is pretty much what was happening here. And so I know they could have probably fooled some other people, but not necessarily for me. I appreciate, like I said, little nuanced details like maybe the belt, a few characteristics inside of the belt, and then I do appreciate the chrome look to the heels right here because they did double as like little blades that she was able to utilize during her fight style. But outside of that, nothing is really sticking out to me from this costume that really makes me go, yeah, this is a looker. Specifically that likeness behind the mask of the head sculpt. It's really well painted as far as makeup, as far as the lipstick, the blush amongst the skin. It's actually really good skin work when it comes to the paint applications, but if you're looking for any kind of Hathaway resemblance, we're going to have to come up with some kind of variant, apart from the platinum variant that's already floating out there, to really get a much more keen likeness, because we're kind of feeling a little sketchy with the Dark Knight trilogy overall, as far as the Joker, as far as the Batman, as far as the Bane, as far as definitely the Two-Face that just looks like a caricature, and I feel like she stands very close to them as far as the likeness, because it just looks like it's trying to emulate that Hathaway Catwoman, not really exactly look like her. And that goes extra for the goggles, which are mounted here on top, which, like I mentioned before, I thought that they were very cleverly utilized in the movie itself, because in the movie, they're a little much more further back to make them look like cat ears, but you can see right here that this specific version has them in a very mobile state that allows you to not only fold it towards the back like so and kind of get them out of the way so you can take a closer look at that hair sculpt, but also fold them towards the front to then cover her eyes and make it look like she's properly wearing them. And when she is wearing them, they actually do look on point. They fit rather snug around the temple area, and they can technically be removed. They're actually being held by these pegs. Whether or not they're supposed to be removable, I feel like they are, but the only thing that makes me a little dubious to that is that a little bit of the skin paint that is around the whole area actually kind of comes off with it. So now looking back, I'm like, maybe it's meant to be removable, but at least mine kind of fits in place and kind of hugs it in a way that doesn't feel terribly loose, but you can move it up and down like you see before you're there. But if you really want it to sit in a much more tight spot so that it's not just flimsing about, it's right about right there. But officially, that's not accurate. It's supposed to be back here, but when you do that, you have this giant gap in between the goggles and the back of her head, and it's supposed to be a bit lower to make it look more like the cat ears. And that's when that platinum variant comes into play, because that version does have the goggles in their proper place. I don't think that they're movable in that version, and for a very obvious reason. That's because that's supposed to be the definitive Dark Knight trilogy Catwoman by Anne Hathaway. Not necessarily this version. This is the version that is bundled with the Batpod. And in order to kind of retain the illusion, they decided to give her a winded look to her hair sculpt, which is decently painted and sculpted, but you could see right here that it's supposed to be designed like it's blowing in the wind. The platinum version that is still out there in the wild, I still have not acquired, does not have this form of hair sculpt. It's actually straight down and neutral. And thus, they decided to say, hey, you don't really have to move the goggles for that version. So they kept it in a much more sculpted place that makes it look like the cat ears. And you're not going to have that happening here. Which on the one hand, sure, it adds functionality to the goggles. So therefore, you're able to flip them up and down. And it kind of gives a little bit of playability. But outside of that, if you're looking for accuracy, you're not really going to find it here. Plus, the hair is kind of stuck in this position. So it makes you think, okay, that kind of gives some variation between the two versions, whether it be the version that comes with the Batpod or the Platinum. Outside of that, what else do you really get for it? I mean, overall, it looks like it's the same figure, the same buck. In fact, you even get the same articulation, which being a nimble Catwoman figure that is using the same buck as a prior existing one that I also complimented for having decent articulation, is going to come with the territory. The head, despite having that hair kind of blowing in the wind, does manage to stay out of the way for full rotation, 360 all the way around, as well as decent tilting up and down and side to side. Then the arms are, of course, going to be a little bit on the nimble side, but does allow full rotation, 360 degrees vertically, as well as extension towards the sides. No real butterfly movement on the right joint, but there can be a little bit of nudging on the left, but I'm not entirely sure if that was by design, personally speaking. Now, these really high gloves that, like I said, I just personally don't remember her having, they do allow a form of illusion trick to mask the bicep swivel. So you can rotate the bicep towards the top right there where the two pieces kind of meet, the two textures, so to speak. So that's a little bit of a neat trick when it comes to toy design. And right below that, you have the two joints at the elbow that do fully bend all the way up. But you'll notice that they're actually ratcheted. They even make a little bit of a clicking noise. So I thought that was actually pretty interesting that they incorporated that into a Catwoman figure and not so much Batman. I would greatly appreciate if we can also include that, not just with Batman, but frankly with an awful lot more McFarlane Toys figures. Then we get to of course, the wrist joints that are flush with the overall forearm and does allow full rotation of the hands all the way around, as well as being able to bend them inwards and outwards. You do have a mid-torso joint that allows full rotation 360, but it is a little on the tight side, so be careful. And slight crunching upward, actually towards the top, towards the back. It's pretty flexible, and it kind of has to be if you're going to be utilizing it for the Batpod, as well as crunching towards the inside slightly, not as good as it could have been, and slight crunching from side to side. When you get to the waist, it's a bit more on the limited side. You can't really rotate it because of how much wider the hips kind of get, as well as the belts kind of encroaching it all. But you do get some slight crunching inwards and outwards and side to side, so further mobility overall through the torso right about right there. Then you get the top leg joints that do allow the leg to fully bend all the way up, except it seems like there's a bit of a hop that it needs to take, like right when it gets to right there. It feels like it doesn't want to go any further, but you give it an extra press, especially after warming the joints up a little bit, and you can't flex it towards the top like about so, as well as some slight flexibility towards the back about that far before the diaper piece kind of gets in the way, but it's actually pretty decent. And full extension towards the sides, almost a full 180, though one of the joints here is a little bit on the tough side, but once you get it past, again, that little hop, that little extra little pivot, you can extend it almost a full 180, so that's pretty cool. And what is even cooler is that since she is going to be riding some sort of vehicle, they decided to have a thigh swivel hidden within the two pieces that kind of form this area right here where the two textures meet. So you can actually rotate the leg on the thigh swivel right above that edge of the boot where the plastics sort of meet. However, the only downside is that when you do get to rotating the thigh swivel, you'll notice that that's exactly where they decided to mask the trademark material. So you have the stamps right there for the trademark stuff, as well as the little logos. So it's a little bit on the egregious side, but of course, where else are they really going to put that right? So it kind of makes sense. Then you get the two knee joints that are fully able to bend all the way up and flex almost entirely upon their joints, and much like the elbows, are also slightly ratcheted. So again, that's pretty interesting that they decided to incorporate that. Maybe it's because she's going to be thrown with the Batpod that they wanted to make sure that she's really stable. But if anything, when it comes to stability, they definitely need to prioritize that with the ankles, which are pretty decent. They're not terrible, but I think they could have been a little bit better because I've already had a handful of instances where she's very difficult to stand because of the heels. It's going to come with the territory. I mean, in real life, anybody who wears heels has a tough time just standing in them, period. You know, my respect to them for going for hours wearing heels, regardless of who they are. Wearing heels is no joke. Yeah. Trust me, I know. Pause.
Hey, yo, what the
But thankfully, they did include those joints that I really like that flush with the ankle that can fully bend downwards and upwards, as well as being able to rotate 360, are decently painted and sculpted with the glossy paint. And then you technically do have toesies right there, but of course, with the style of shoe that you're dealing with, they're going to be very, very tiny by design. So far, we're dealing with a very similar figure to that of the Platinum. However, there's still a very compelling argument for me to maybe double dip and get that platinum, considering that this girl comes with the Batpod. And we have yet to make an argument for the price tag, considering that yes, she comes with the Batpod, but what else does she come included with? Apart from the traditional trading card and base, she does come with the additional hand accessories that you can swap out for the gripping ones. She comes with these extended ones, and that really about does it. Imagine my slight disappointment to discover that she doesn't come with the additional accessories that the platinum version comes with. Apart from the differences with the hairstyle and the goggles, she also comes with the clean slate gadget accessory that she can hold in one of her gripping hands, as well as a broken cowl piece from Bane and Batman's fight in the sewers. And so seeing the included accessories, seeing the difference of the sculpt with the hair and the much more accurate goggle ears behind the head, I don't know what it is, but right now it really is. I honestly feel like that platinum version shouldn't even be a platinum. That should have been a wide release of a Catwoman figure, and she shouldn't have been so limited. But maybe that was McFarlane's way of saying, well, not too many people are going to be buying her because it's Catwoman. I mean, I'm being fully blunt and transparent here. Being Catwoman is probably an influential factor as to why he made so many limited releases. It's one of the things that he's often talked about. But it is Catwoman. It's part of the Nolanverse. There's an awful lot of collectors out there that want to go for a complete collective set of the Dark Knight trilogy, whether it be including the Joker, building Bane, Two-Face. Hell, some people out there are still asking for Liam Neeson's Ra's al Ghul. They're asking for a couple of other characters that made some very acute appearances in the Dark Knight trilogy. Hell, some people are still willing to double dip for a Batman Begins suit Batman from the first movie. So there's still going to be a market for a Catwoman, so it's weird to see that your only instances to get her is either as a platinum that is very hard to find across wide retailers that does make a case for her to be bought, considering that she comes with her own unique set of accessories and a very different style to her hair and goggles. But then you have this version that is catered to be included with the Batpod for $70. Now, since she doesn't come with those extra accessories, we have to tackle the biggest accessory of them all, which is going to be the Batpod. And I'll admit, I have been wanting to see what McFarlane does with a Batpod. Hell, I'm still wondering if they're going to be bringing us their very own Tumblr. And I'll probably be there day one, considering that I, for the most part, really enjoyed the Keaton Batmobile that they made, the two that they actually managed to put out, the 1.0 and the 2.0 after some fixtures. One thing right off the bat, I don't know if I'm fully on board of it being exclusive to the McFarlane Toy store, especially now since it's long been sold out. And it would be, I think, in their best interest to kind of spread it across the retailers, because I feel like so many people are definitely after this, and maybe it'll be a singular release. With that being said, there are some trappings still found right here within the constant vehicles that McFarlane always does, specifically with Bat Cycles. And it's pretty par for the course as far as quality of plastic, quality of detail and paint, or some may argue lack thereof. This is modeled, however, after, I guess, the prototype of the Batpod, and that is made clear by how much more added chrome there is. I specifically remember the Batpod that Batman specifically uses in Dark Knight and Dark Knight Rises being a bit more black, being a bit more grayish, grayscale, jet black, smoky, if you will, specifically around these guards that cover up his forearms and hands, and even some of these areas right here towards the front where you have these pistons. So I am not the biggest fan of how much brighter this chrome really is, even though it's specifically much more accurate to the version that Catwoman is using in the climax for Dark Knight Rises. With that said, the sculpting is pretty serviceable. It's modeled after that version. You even have a little bit of this, like, I really wish that they would have done something very die-casty. That would then make the price tag that this bundle is going for a bit more digestible, because it looks like they kind of wanted to do something like that here with the brushed metal look to the pedals where the feet go, to this area right here where this pipe and the little divots and pistons, like I said, the little hydraulics kind of stemming here towards the front wheel, look like they've they were kind of setting it up for diecast, but it looks like it didn't really pan out. Maybe costs were a little bit too high. Nevertheless, though, you're dealing with an awful lot of hard plastic here towards the middle, except for the areas where you kind of have to fit either the knees, the feet, as well as the hands. These are all made out of these like rubbery, bendable pieces of plastic that flex and can kind of serve as a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, this does allow for some malleability to fit figures on, whether it be Catwoman or Batman himself, but on the other, it kind of makes it feel just a little bit on the cheap side, especially when you're kind of moving this about and go, yeah, that's definitely plastic. It's, looking at that $70 price tag and thinking to myself, was this truly worth it? Now, a little bit of that quality comes back to kind of placate those feelings when you're dealing with these wheels, because the rubber is actually pretty solid. They're very girthy. You have the treadings right here that feel very accurate to the ones that you see in the film. And so you kind of get this image like, yeah, this is the Batpod. And once you get the assembly out of the way, which is only really these two pieces here towards the front so that it can properly fit in the box, and you take the two pieces, clamp them on, and it's funny that they're both utilizing a very different method to one another. This one's kind of like on a circular little peg that you kind of clasp in place, and then the other one, you have like several different tabs to be able to wrap itself around this little cylindrical piece. Once you get these things popped on, you then get this image that looks very accurate to the Nolan Batpod. And trust me, this speaks to a little bit of my nostalgic tendencies, whether it be putting Catwoman here on top or Batman. I just wish that the process to do so was a bit more favorable. Yeah, I don't know what it is. I've already tried it a number of times, but both figures, whether it be Catwoman here, who's obviously bundled with the figure itself, it's pretty seamless to get the grips into her grip holding hands, obviously. And like I mentioned before, the rubberized plastic that is a little on the bendable side here that forms the handlebars is at least bendy enough to be able to flex in a way that is not going to feel like it's going to break when trying to make this whole imagery happen. But when you then try to kind of domino effect it in a way to make sure that the hands are fitting into the grips and then the elbows are resting in the cups that are inside behind the guards right here, and then making sure that the knees are placed inside of these cups right here where they're supposed to be resting, and then the heels are definitely flattened out towards the feet rests here towards the back. It's just something just doesn't feel like it's actually sculpted right amongst the rest here towards the back. And then you'll notice that the seat is actually quite empty. So I'm like, all right, so is she supposed to be resting over here? Is she supposed to be extended a little bit more? But then because of the way that her neck and head piece is sculpted, she's not really facing forward. So I'm trying to bend the torso a little bit to make sure that she's aiming towards the front. It just doesn't feel all that great to do so with Catwoman. So when I was struggling with her, I thought to myself, well, she wasn't the only one riding the Batpod. Let's get the Dark Knight himself and give him a go. And here's the deal. I'm opting to use the original release of the Bale Batman because officially now I feel like we have three of these guys. We have the original Dark Knight Trilogy Bill the Bane Wave version. We have the Ultimate Six-Pack movie version. And now we have a Platinum floating around there that is the skydive version, but technically he's not the skydive because he's got the mask and the cape, and he doesn't have the skydive accessory. So I'm like, why is he being called? It's a little frustrating. I don't know what McFarlane is doing right now, but there's some releases that are Platinum, but they're being secretly released, and amongst them was the skydive version that comes with like a wired cape that is maybe supposed to be better fitted for this guy because the wired cape makes it look like it's blowing in the wind as he's riding. I understand that logic, but I opted for the Dark Knight Trilogy Bill the Bane version with the rubberized cape because I feel like most people bought that version. He was a bit easier to come by, whether it be in person during retailers or online. He wasn't as hard to find as the Ultimate Six-Pack version, and most definitely the recently released Platinum versions that just barely came out. So I figured, okay, let's use this guy. And you can see that even with the rubberized cape kind of bending itself out of the way, I feel like the lower part of the body does complement the Batpod a little easier when it comes to bending the legs, making sure that the feet are resting towards the back right here. The knees are actually inside of the cups. And once you get them looking straight forward like so, it looks pretty cool. But then you get to the arms and the top torso. That's when an awful lot of my complaints that I initially had about this figure when I first covered him and was comparing him to the old Mattel days, that I started to then figure that it doesn't even complement vehicles very well, specifically the Batpod. I can only imagine if he's even going to be able to fit in the tumbler, whether it be with the rubberized cape or the cloth one. And so here you see an awful lot of those trappings kind of come back to bite him in the ass, whether it be a little bit of the lacking of crunching in the torso and how disproportionate he may be. I remember me and an awful lot of other people were saying how some team worked on the top part of the body versus the other, and that's why it looked just a little off, specifically around the arms that don't really flush very well in my unit. I think some others are a little bit more complementary, but for mine, one of my main complaints was the arms just not being able to flush to the sides of the body, and I feel like here they're rearing its ugly head to the point where this arm, the left one, has actually already popped off its bicep swivel a number of times. Like it did right now. I didn't mean to do that. And I thought it was broken, but no, it's simply just a joint that just happens to be a little too loose on mine. Doesn't necessarily happen with the right one. And that's not even factoring in that one hand is actually sculpted to be in a fist as opposed to the right one that does have the gripping notion. So you can use it on one of the grips here on the right, but not necessarily on the left. You're just going to have to simulate it to make it look like he's grabbing both of the grips of the Batpod, which then feeds into my theory as to why that specific platinum skydive, that's not really a skydive version because he still has the mask, he still has the cape that happens to be clothed and wired, that favors not only the look of the Batpod, but also functionality, because that version does come with two gripping hands as opposed to one fisted, one gripping, and therefore it's probably going to work best with the Batpod. But then that brings up even more of a conversation as to why the Batpod had to be locked behind exclusivity, because that platinum, despite being incredibly hard to find, was available in various retailers. People are finding him at Target, not necessarily Walmart or Amazon, but Target. I believe at one point he was available on the McFarlane Toy Store, but then they pulled the listing along with the Catwoman version. BBTS was selling it, though, for a very marked up premium that even I'm not willing to abide by. $40? I'm sorry, guys, but no. So it's a little weird how everything is just getting kind of lost in translation. And even though from certain angles Batman on the Batpod looks kind of neat, there's so many things here feeling a little too loose, a little too wonky as far as actually looking like they were designed to work with each other, that it still kind of puts doubts in my head as to whether or not the Batpod was initially worth it by itself, let alone being bundled with Catwoman here, because I'm still thinking about the actual value you're getting here for the $70. Is it really warranting going to the McFarlane Toy as an exclusive? I gotta be honest, not so much, especially since there is a platinum out there that you can maybe give yourself a chance, pull from the luck of the draw, go to your local Target or Targets and go on a very excruciating hunt to then maybe save a few bucks at the standard $22.99 and get yourself a platinum Catwoman that has a much more neutral hair stance, you got much more accessories, a better bang for your buck. And then the Batpod, sure, right now, this is the only real way to get it is via the exclusivity of the McFarlane Toy Store. But when you take into account that on average, vehicles, specifically bat cycles of any kind, go for the standard $30. Figures are about $22.99 to maybe just a flat $20. You're looking at about $50. So what does that extra $20 entail? Not very much, especially since I know for a fact, and I hate to say this, I would not rule out the possibility that McFarlane is going to release the Batpod by itself with the original color scheming of that satin finish jet black from The Dark Knight. It wouldn't necessarily be past them to do it, considering they've already done it before with the Keaton Batmobile. They did the original Flash version that had the glossy finish. So many people were kind of divisive on that, and then finally a few months later, as an Amazon exclusive, but still sweetened with the inclusion of that proper '89 Keaton Batman suit, we got the original Batmobile with the much more satin finish, the much more accurate color scheming behind some of the little details, the cockpit, etc. And so I really can't shake this gut feeling that we are going to get a proper Batpod with less chrome detailing, much more accurate applications that favor the look that the Batpod did in The Dark Knight, and who knows, he might even come bundled with that platinum skydive Batman that comes with the cloth cape and the wired cape, and also with the functioning hands that then factor in, and maybe that will be sold at the standard $50. Maybe it'll be an Amazon exclusive, Entertainment Earth exclusive. And right now, this is a good enough set to scratch the itch for having a Batpod in my collection from the Dark Knight trilogy, as well as a Catwoman. So I don't initially hate the fact that this was purchased, especially since it came bundled with my skydive Batman, the one with the unmasked Christian Bale head sculpt, and I got it at a pretty good bundled sale price that McFarlane Toy Store often likes to do on their page, along with certain secret codes, kind of like the In-N-Out secret menu. Ever so often they have those codes that are out there and will get you a little bit of an added discount on either the shipping or the taxes. So there's a bit of a sweetened deal here that kind of softened the blow. But that's a very exclusive case. Does that really excuse some of the shortcomings that this bundle does for that $70? Not so much, and that's why I'm gonna give the overall package a pretty modest and serviceable 6 out of 10. I would not blame anybody whatsoever for skipping out on this deal. If you saw it sold out on the page, don't fret, because again, you could take your chances at your local Target to try to find that platinum Catwoman. As for the Batpod, again, I would say simply just wait, because I just can't shake this feeling that it's going to get an individual release later down the line with the proper color scheming, because it looks like this is becoming a little bit of a McFarlane trend. Otherwise, guys, thank you for watching the video all the way to the very end. If you enjoyed it, hit the thumbs up button. If not, hit the thumbs down. Where are you guys' stands on this little bit of malevolent trend of getting some of these figures being McFarlane Toy exclusive, but not really warranting the gold label that it brandishes on the box, considering the value that you're getting? Because I feel like it's stung a little to shelve out $70 when we've seen things like these go for about $40 to $50, despite, like I said, some of the savings, some of the bundle deals that I had with the codes and whatnot. Whatever your thoughts are, let me know, and as always, stay humble. I'll catch you guys later.